Hi, my name's Elena. 5 years ago, my family didn't just shame me. They erased me. They lied. They laughed. They buried me in silence. And when they thought I'd never rise again, they sent me an invitation expecting me to smile. But the thing about being buried alive is you learn to dig your way out, and you don't come back empty-handed. Tonight, I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to rewrite the story they tried to end. Before we dive in, tell me if your family erased your name, would you forgive? Or would you fight? It had been one of those grinding board meeting days that left the city air tasting like coffee and ambition. As I pushed open the door to my penthouse apartment in downtown Seattle, the soft golden hour light spilled across the hardwood floors, almost making the place look warmer than it felt. I kicked off my Louboutins, letting them thud against the wall, and dropped my briefcase on the Italian marble table. The mail sliding off in a messy fan quarterly reports industry magazines, an invitation to speak at Harvard Business School. And then it caught my eye. A heavy envelope, thick and cream-colored with the Castellano family crest embossed in gold. My fingers hesitated midair. The world seemed to narrow down to the space between my hand and that envelope. My chest tightened like an invisible hand was squeezing it. I hadn't seen that crest since the night I walked away 5 years ago. After Isabella stood in front of our entire extended family and raised a glass to my downfall. I wiped my hands on my silk blouse as if they were dirty and finally reached for the envelope. It was absurdly formal gold wax seal, the kind you'd expect from a royal summons, not from a family that had treated you like a pariah. I traced the curve of my name on the front, Elena Castellano, then slowly slid my letter opener under the seal. The scent of expensive stationery and old memories hit me at the same time, inside a wedding invitation so ornate it was almost vulgar. You are cordially invited to the marriage of Isabella Castellano and Marcus Chen. My stomach flipped. Isabella, the golden girl, the perfect daughter, the future of the Castellano business empire, at least in their eyes. And Marcus Chen. The name rang a bell, probably another tech mogul's son to solidify the family's Silicon Valley connections. I set the invitation down with care as if it might explode. Something else slipped out of the envelope. A plain piece of lined paper. No seal, no pomp. My mother's handwriting, shaky and urgent. Please come. I miss you. They don't know I'm writing you. Mom. I stared at it, my breath catching. The same mother who had sat there silent the night Isabella raised her glass and called me a disgrace. The same mother who hadn't lifted a finger when I packed my bags in front of the whole family and walked out into the cold Seattle rain. And now this, a secret plea, hidden like contraband. For a second the room blurred around me. I grabbed the edge of the counter to steady myself, the cool marble biting into my palms. Without thinking, my hand went to the platinum necklace around my neck, the tiny gavel charm my grandfather gave me the day I was appointed CEO. He was the only one who had looked at me and said, "You're enough, Elena, just as you are." I pressed the charm to my lips for courage, or maybe to keep from breaking apart. Memories slammed into me like a fist. Thanksgiving 5 years ago. Isabella a few glasses deep, clinking her wine goblet against Dad's Scotch glass, her voice loud enough to slice through the polite murmuring of cousins and aunts. "She thinks she's too good for us now," she'd said, laughing meanly. "Trading family legacy for corporate ladder climbing, trading our values for strangers' approval. What a damn disgrace." The laughter, the coughs, the awkward scraping of silverware. And Mom. Her eyes watery but her mouth clamped shut. Dad? He didn't even meet my gaze. I stood there then, 32 years old, humiliated like a schoolgirl called out in assembly. No defense, no lifeline, just silence. That was the night I packed my Tesla with everything that would fit and drove away without looking back. Until now. I blinked hard, snapping myself back to the present. The invitation sat there gleaming smugly under my kitchen light, like it knew exactly what it was doing. Was this some desperate attempt to pretend none of it had happened? A polished PR move to drag the prodigal daughter back into the family photos? Or worse, a trap designed to humiliate me all over again? The RSVP card stared up at me, blank, expectant. God, a part of me wanted to rip the whole thing up, toss it in the trash where it belonged. Another part, the part that still ached on Christmas mornings, the part that still wondered if they missed me, wanted to show up just once. Not for them. For me. Because maybe it was time to stop letting their silence define my worth. My phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the heavy silence. I snatched it up, thumbing over to Sophia's contact, my anchor, my North Star through every ugly chapter of the story. I typed the words before I could second-guess myself. Sophia, should I walk back into the lion's den? I hovered a second, then hit send. The city hummed around me, the distant wail of a siren, the low bass of a passing car. Life moving on. I slipped the note back into the envelope, tucked it into my briefcase, and closed my eyes. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The Castellano family had no idea who they were inviting back. The question lingered in my mind like smoke curling against a cold window. Should I walk back into the lion's den? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Instead, I walked across the room and pulled open the cabinet above the sink. My hand automatically found the bottle of Macallan tucked behind a box of organic tea I never touched. I poured 2 fingers into a crystal glass, no ice, and stood there staring at the RSVP card lying on the kitchen table like it had the power to rearrange my life. I took a slow sip, letting the burn bloom in my chest. It wasn't enough to drown the memories clawing their way up. It was Thanksgiving 5 years ago. I could smell the roasted turkey, the expensive wine, the cloying scent of my mother's Chanel No. 5 mixed with candles that were just a little too sweet. The Castellano family estate had been packed as always, with every cousin, distant aunt, and business associate crammed into the grand dining hall, like the set of some fake glossy ad for American family values. Back then, I was still new to the C-suite, carrying the weight of being the youngest CEO in my company's history. I remember showing up late that day, fresh from an emergency board meeting. My suit still creased, my shoes scuffed from running across rain-slicked parking garages. Isabella caught sight of me as I slipped into my seat at the far end of the table. Her eyes glittered with the kind of mischief that always ended badly for someone else. The night wore on. Toasts started. First Dad, then Uncle Roberto, then a few others, raising glasses to new ventures, new babies, new vacation homes in the right zip codes. And then Isabella stood. Some of us, she said, voice rich and poisonous, choose to honor the family name. Her eyes locked onto mine, a wicked smile creeping up. Others choose to abandon everything we've built for, what was it again? Oh yes, disrupting traditional business models. There was a smattering of awkward chuckles around the room. Some family friends raised their eyebrows but said nothing. I sat there frozen, the turkey on my plate growing cold. At least when I ran the Singapore branch. Isabella continued swirling her wine. I didn't need to beg venture capitalists for validation. Real success stays in the family. Mom clutched her wine glass tighter. Dad looked at the centerpiece like it had suddenly become fascinating. Nobody said a word in my defense, the kind of silence that screams. I remembered folding my napkin, slowly, methodically placing it on my plate, and rising from my chair. Nobody stopped me. Nobody even asked where I was going. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so hard it took 3 tries to get the key fob to work. I never attended another family event after that. And not once did anyone call to ask why. I drained the whiskey glass in one long pull and set it down harder than necessary, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment. A part of me wanted to believe things could be different now. That maybe the note from Mom meant there was a crack in the stone wall they'd built between us. But another part, the smarter part, knew better. I glanced at the RSVP card again, then reached for my laptop. If I was going to walk into this wedding, I needed to know exactly who Marcus Chen was. It didn't take long. LinkedIn profiles, tech blogs, Forbes, 30, under 30. Marcus Chen wasn't just some ornamental groom plucked from high society. He was a social entrepreneur founder of 3 successful nonprofits focused on educational equity in underserved communities. I scrolled further down and froze. 3 years ago, a TED Talk. I clicked play. There, he was passionate and articulate, talking about dismantling traditional power structures in business. And then, 20 minutes in, he said it. I was inspired by leaders like Elena Castellano, who proved that success doesn't have to come at the cost of your values. I rewound, played it again. My name from the mouth of my sister's fiancé. Irony twisted in my gut like a dull blade. Isabella, who had once stood up and humiliated me for abandoning the family empire, was marrying a man who probably had my Harvard Business Review interviews bookmarked. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, heart pounding against my ribs. Maybe fate had a sense of humor after all. The clock on the wall ticked forward into the night, marking time like a slow drumbeat. I stared at the RSVP card. This time my hands didn't shake. I grabbed a Mont Blanc pen from the counter, took a breath, and in one clean, deliberate motion wrote, "I'll be there." I folded the card neatly, slid it back into the return envelope, and pressed the seal shut. No ceremony, no second-guessing. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. But not the show they were expecting. The glass of whiskey sat forgotten on the counter as I turned off the lights and headed toward my bedroom. The night air through the cracked windows smelled like rain and possibility, and somewhere deep inside me, a quiet fire caught. I slipped the sealed RSVP card into the mailbox outside my building the next morning, standing there longer than necessary as the metal door clanged shut behind it. There was something final about the sound, like slamming a gate on the past and cracking another one open toward whatever waited ahead. Seattle was wrapped in its typical morning mist, the kind that pressed against the skin and turned the city into an impressionist painting. I didn't go straight to the office. Instead, I turned left at Pine Street, letting instinct steer me through streets I hadn't walked in years. The family plot at Lakeview Cemetery lay at the crest of Capitol Hill, surrounded by ancient oaks that whispered secrets to each other in the breeze. The moment I stepped through the wrought iron gates, my chest tightened, old griefs stirring like sediment at the bottom of a glass. I grabbed the bouquet of white orchids from the passenger seat, smoothing the cellophane wrapper, and made my way up the winding path toward the Castellano section. There, under a black granite headstone, was the only person who had ever seen me for who I was, without conditions, without bargaining chips. Alejandro Castellano, entrepreneur and philanthropist. Grandpa. I knelt carefully, brushing away a few fallen leaves, and set the flowers at the base of his stone. The engraving had started to soften with age, but his words, the ones he lived by, remained burned into my memory. Success without integrity is failure in disguise. I sat back on my heels, letting the morning quiet settle around me. Then, from the inside pocket of my coat, I pulled out the small leather journal I'd carried with me for years, but had never opened. It had been the last thing he handed me before the cancer stole his booming voice. "When you need it most," he'd said. Well, if not now, then when I opened to the first page, his handwriting bold despite the tremor in his hands. "My dear Elena, real power isn't loud. It's in standing tall without needing to push others down. You won't always be their favorite. You weren't born to be. You were born to outgrow them. The empire you build with your own hands will outlast any throne they tried to keep from you. Remember, lions don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep. All my love. Abuelo." I stared at the words until they blurred, a knot tightening in my throat. All these years I had tried to prove myself, to explain myself, to belong somewhere that never truly wanted me. And he had known. He had known I would outgrow them long before I even understood what that meant. Tucking the journal back into my coat, I pressed my hand over the platinum necklace at my throat. The gavel charm caught the weak morning light, a reminder of everything I'd built without them. The first few drops of rain kissed the back of my hand, soft as a benediction. I stood, brushed the dampness from my coat, and made my way back down the hill. By the time I reached my office tower downtown, the mist had thickened into a steady drizzle. I rode the executive elevator to the 42nd floor, nodding to my assistant who barely looked up from her screens. The familiar rhythm of corporate life grounded me until I heard my name carried on a whisper from the break room. Did you see the Chen Castellano merger announcement? Yeah, but did you know Marcus Chen literally quoted Elena Castellano in his Stanford commencement speech last year, called her a visionary who redefined ethical leadership? I slowed my steps, pretending to check my phone. Isn't she Isabella's sister? The one who got disowned? Yeah. Awkward wedding gift, having your fiancé worship the sister you tried to erase. I kept walking, keeping my face neutral, but inside something shifted. Something hardened. All their careful architecture, the perfect family image, the chosen heirs, the golden narratives built on the very foundation they had tried to tear down. A low, grim smile pulled at the corners of my mouth as I stepped into my corner office and closed the door behind me. They wrote me off, pretended I didn't exist. But they were about to remember me the hard way. The storm outside thickened, rattling the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, as if the city itself was preparing for something bigger. And for the first time in years, I felt steady, unshakable. 3 weeks passed in a blur of strategic preparations. I threw myself into work, closing a major acquisition, speaking at an international women's leadership summit, being featured on the cover of Fortune magazine. Every success was another brick in the wall I was building, not to keep them out, but to show them what they'd thrown away. Then came the call. I was reviewing contracts when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Seattle area code. Logic urged me to ignore it. My heart, traitorous as ever, pressed answer. Elena. My mother's voice filtered through, tentative and strained, like a violin string pulled too tight. I stared out at the Seattle skyline, watching the Space Needle pierce through low-hanging clouds. Mom, I was hoping, she began faltering. Would you have dinner with me, just the two of us, before the wedding? The request twisted something deep in my chest. Part of me, the harder part, wanted to say no to protect the walls I'd spent years rebuilding. But there was another part, raw and unhealed, that still remembered a time when her voice meant safety, not betrayal. After a long beat, I said, "All right, where?" "The Georgian," she said quickly, almost too quickly. "Of course. The restaurant at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, where appearances were a second religion." "I'll be there," I replied, already regretting it as I ended the call. The next evening, twilight draped itself across the city in muted purples and grays. I drove with the windows cracked open, letting the damp air numb the war raging inside me. The Georgian hadn't changed: crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, the soft clink of expensive silverware against china. I spotted her immediately, sitting alone at a corner table, a glass of untouched Chablis trembling in her hand. She stood halfway when she saw me, smile brittle around the edges. "Elena." "Mom," I answered, sliding into the chair across from her. We ordered her a salad. She would pick at me, a black coffee I didn't need. Small talk filled the space between us like sawdust. The weather, the wedding preparations, how Seattle's skyline was changing. None of it mattered. None of it touched the chasm between us. It wasn't until the coffee cooled in front of me that she spoke, setting her fork down with a soft clink. "I owe you an apology," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her, waiting. "Isabella." She paused, gathering herself. "She told everyone you had a breakdown, that you left because you couldn't handle the pressure of real success. She said you were jealous of her position in the family business." The words didn't surprise me, but hearing them out loud scraped something raw. She twisted her napkin until the fabric strained. She said it to Marcus, to everyone, and Her voice broke. I didn't stop her. I thought, I thought if we didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. I stared at her for a long moment, the hum of the restaurant fading into the background. You didn't protect me? I said, my voice low but steady. You let them bury me. Tears pooled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. Not rage, not sadness, only the cold clarity of a wound too old to bleed. She reached into her purse with trembling fingers and slid a small velvet box across the table. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside, resting against dark velvet, was the ring my grandfather had promised me when I made CEO a vintage piece with the family crest, the one Isabella had claimed went missing years ago. Isabella kept it all these years, she whispered. Hidden in her safe. I took it back. I closed the box and slipped it into my jacket pocket. No thank you. No forgiveness. Some things couldn't be bought back with heirlooms and late apologies. I pushed back my chair, the legs scraping lightly against the floor. She flinched at the sound. They buried me once, I said quietly, standing tall. This time I'm digging myself out. And I'm bringing the truth with me. Her lips parted as if to speak, but I was already moving, crossing the restaurant floor without looking back. The ring sat heavy in my pocket, a weight I would carry but never wear. Outside, the Seattle mist had thickened into a light rain, but the air smelled cleaner, now charged with electricity. I walked toward my car, each step steady, each breath deeper than the last. The next morning brought chaos. I woke to my phone buzzing violently on the nightstand. Not calls, notifications, headlines, social media tags. My PR director's urgent texts. Anonymous sources claim tech CEO Elena Castellano stole company from family. Former employees allege toxic leadership from controversial executive. Investigation: how Elena Castellano really built her empire. One after another, a coordinated smear campaign assembled itself across every major gossip blog and business tabloid. The articles were careful, never quite libel, but poisonous enough to plant doubt. Unnamed sources recycled quotes taken out of context, even old photos from my early startup days manipulated to make me look haggard and unstable. I sat up in bed scrolling through the hit pieces with clinical detachment. The writing style, the timing, the specific details only family would know. It all pointed to one source: Isabella. She'd hired the same crisis management firm that had helped bury Dad's insider trading scandal a decade ago, spinning it into a story of a misunderstood visionary. Now they were trying to bury me the same way. I set the phone down and took a long, steady breath. Then I smiled. Because Isabella had made one critical mistake. She thought I would react like the Elena of 5 years ago, scrambling, defensive, desperate to explain myself. She had no idea who I'd become. I made one call. Sophia, it's time. Release everything. Within 2 hours, my response was live. No emotional rants. No defensive statements. Just truth delivered with surgical precision. I posted a single thread across all my verified social media accounts, accompanied by documentation that my legal team had been preparing for months. SEC filings showing I built my company from scratch, with no family investment, patent applications in my name alone, bank records showing I'd actually loaned the family business $2 million during their 2019 crisis, never repaid email threads, where Isabella begged me for strategic advice while publicly dismissing my success security footage from 5 years ago, showing me leaving the family estate alone, while Isabella gave interviews about my mental breakdown. At the top, a simple statement: the truth doesn't need embellishment. Here are the facts. The internet exploded. Within an hour, Team Elena was trending. Tech leaders who'd worked with me came forward with their own stories. Employees posted about the mentorship I'd provided. The 3 nonprofits I quietly funded released statements of support. But the killing blow came from an unexpected source. Marcus Chen went live on Instagram. Not from his official account, from his personal one. He sat in what looked like his home office, looking exhausted but determined. "I need to say something," he began. "For 3 years I've kept quiet about why I really fell in love with Isabella Castellano. It wasn't her family name or business connections. It was because she told me stories about her sister Elena, about her courage, her innovation, her refusal to compromise her values. She made Elena sound like everything I wanted in a partner." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "I just learned those stories were lies. The woman Isabella described as weak and jealous is actually everything Isabella pretended to be. I've spent the last 48 hours reading court documents, watching old interviews, talking to people who really know Elena Castellano, and I'm disgusted, not just with the lies, but with myself for believing them." He looked directly at the camera. "The wedding is off, and Elena, if you're watching this, I'm sorry. Your family didn't deserve you." The live stream ended. My phone exploded with calls, texts, media requests. I ignored them all. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my window watching the Seattle skyline glitter against the darkening sky. The fallout was swift and brutal. By morning, Isabella had shifted tactics. If she couldn't destroy my reputation, she'd try to destroy my company. A formal letter arrived at my office via courier. She was suing me for corporate theft, claiming I'd stolen trade secrets from the family business to build my empire. I read through the lawsuit in my conference room, my general counsel and CFO flanking me. The claims were absurd. I'd left the family business before even starting my company, and my technology was in completely different sectors. But the goal wasn't to win. It was to drain my resources, distract my board, and force me into a settlement that would include a gag order. "She's trying to silence you," my general counsel said quietly. I set the papers down, thinking of my grandfather's words. "Lions don't lose sleep over the opinions of sheep." "Set up a meeting," I said. "Not with lawyers, family only, the Fairmont's presidential suite, and make sure security knows to expect us." 3 days later, I stood in the doorway of the suite I'd rented, watching my family file in. Dad looking older than I remembered. Mom clutching her purse like a shield. And Isabella designer suit impeccable, but with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. They sat on one side of the mahogany table. I remained standing. "You have 1 hour," I said simply. Isabella launched into her prepared speech about family loyalty, about how I'd betrayed the Castellano name, about the shame I'd brought to our legacy. I let her finish. Then I placed a single folder on the table. "Inside," I said quietly, "is every piece of evidence my lawyers have gathered. The falsified records you submitted to the board when you took over the Singapore branch. The contracts you signed using Dad's forged signature. The $3 million you embezzled and blamed on accounting errors." The color drained from her face. "I've known for 2 years," I continued. "I stayed quiet because despite everything, I didn't want to destroy you. But if you proceed with this lawsuit, if you continue this campaign against me, I will file criminal charges. The prosecutor is a friend from law school. She's particularly interested in white-collar crime." Dad's hands trembled as he reached for the folder. Mom hadn't moved, hadn't breathed. "You have 24 hours to withdraw the lawsuit and issue a public apology," I said. "Or I go public with everything." Isabella stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "You wouldn't dare. You'd be destroying the family name." I met her gaze steadily. "You destroyed it 5 years ago when you decided I was disposable. I'm just choosing whether to bury it or let it die quietly." The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire. Then from behind Isabella came a sound I hadn't expected. Clapping. Slow, deliberate applause. A side door opened and Marcus Chen stepped out. But he wasn't alone. 3 members of Castellano Holdings' board of directors followed him, including our largest investor. "Thank you for the evidence, Elena," Marcus said quietly. "The board asked me to review the company's financials as part of our merger discussions. What I found led me to you. We've been recording this meeting with your permission and theirs." He glanced at Isabella. "The board voted this morning. Isabella is removed from her position effective immediately. The authorities will handle the rest." Isabella's perfectly composed mask finally cracked. She lunged toward me, but security, the same security that had saluted me as Madam President when I arrived, stepped forward, smoothly professionally escorting her out. Dad and Mom sat frozen, the weight of their choices finally crushing down on them. I picked up my briefcase, straightened my jacket, and headed for the door. At the threshold, I paused. "The family name will survive," I said, without turning around. "But it will mean something different now. Something honest." 6 months later, I stood on the rooftop terrace of my company's new headquarters, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the sunset over Elliott Bay. The building, 30 stories of sustainable design and innovative architecture, was more than an office. It was proof that you could build something magnificent without compromising your values. The terrace buzzed with conversation. My employees, partners, investors, the family I'd chosen rather than the one I'd been born into. Sophia stood beside me, her own glass raised. "To new beginnings," she said. "To truth," I countered. We clinked glasses as the Seattle skyline shimmered in the golden hour light. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Chen. "The foundation paperwork is complete. The Alejandro Castellano Institute for Ethical Leadership will launch next month. Your grandfather would be proud." I smiled, touching the gavel pendant at my throat. After the family company's restructuring, I'd convinced the board to fund a new initiative, one that would teach young entrepreneurs how to build businesses with integrity. Marcus had volunteered to run it. "Ms. Castellano," a young woman approached, notebook in hand. "One of our new interns fresh from Stanford. The documentary crew is ready for your interview." Ah, yes. Netflix had picked up the rights to my story. Not the family drama I'd refused to sell those rights, but the story of building an ethical empire in an industry known for cutting corners. The real story. "5 minutes," I told her. As she walked away, I noticed someone else approaching. My mother, looking smaller than I remembered, but somehow lighter, as if shedding the family's lies had freed her too. We hadn't spoken since the confrontation, but here she was on my territory holding a small wrapped box. "I won't stay long," she said quietly. I wanted you to have this." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a photo I'd never seen Grandpa and me at my college graduation, both of us laughing at something off camera. On the back, in his handwriting, "My greatest legacy." "He gave it to me before he died," she said. "Told me to give it to you when you'd built something worth more than money. I think that time is now." She turned to leave, then paused. "Isabella got 18 months minimum security. She's working on herself. Maybe someday." "Maybe," I said softly. "But not today." She nodded understanding and left. I stood there as the party continued around me, the photo in one hand, champagne in the other. The city lights began to twinkle as darkness fell, and somewhere in the distance a boat horn echoed across the water. 5 years ago they tried to bury me, tried to erase my name from the family history, tried to convince the world I was weak, unstable, disposable. They had no idea they were planting a seed. Now I stood at the top of a building I'd built, surrounded by people who respected me not for my last name, but for my actions, wearing my grandfather's pendant and holding proof that at least one person had always seen my true worth. The security guard from the Fairmont, the one who'd saluted me as Madam President that day, now worked in our building. He'd told me later that he'd followed my career since the day I was kicked out, that he'd been hoping for years to see me walk back in with my head held high. "You didn't disappoint," he'd said. I took a sip of champagne, thinking about the journey from that cold Thanksgiving night to this warm summer evening. The pain was still there, scarred over but not forgotten. But it no longer defined me. What defined me was what I'd built from the ashes of their rejection. "Ready for your interview." Sophia appeared at my elbow. I set down my glass, straightened my jacket, and nodded. "Let's tell them a story about rising." As I walked toward the camera crew, I thought about everyone watching, every person who'd been called a disgrace by the people who should have loved them most, everyone who'd been told they weren't enough, everyone who'd had to choose between family approval and personal truth. This was for them. For us. Because sometimes the only way to honor where you came from is to outgrow it completely. And sometimes when they call you a disgrace, the best response is to become something so magnificent they have to salute.